Picture this. You think Atlas was just another wanderer, crossing our skies for a brief cosmic instant. You think it would pass, vanish back into this void, and leave us behind. You're wrong. Dead wrong. Because for the first time, the evidence shows it is slowing, adjusting, choosing. This isn't an object on a hyperbolic escape path anymore. It's settling into an orbit. Ours. And the signs are terrifying. That sudden deceleration as it crossed Jupiter's gravity well, not random. That faint but deliberate alignment with Earth's orbital plane, not coincidence. Those chemical emissions we thought were cometary outgassing, they're stabilizers, thrusters, Atlas's maneuvering. What I'm about to show you will shake your idea of cosmic visitors, because this isn't just a comet staying too long. This isn't even an alien probe that came to study us. This is something stranger, something deliberate. Atlas has decided to remain in our neighbourhood. By the end of this investigation, you will understand why every telescope operator is panicking, why whispers inside NASA speak of permanent presence, and why if Atlas truly stays, humanity's timeline splits forever into two eras, before Atlas and after. For as long as humanity has looked at the night sky, we assumed a simple truth. The stars send us light, but nothing else. The objects born in other solar systems, if they ever came near us, would drift past in silence, carried only by gravity's indifferent hand. They would not pause, they would not linger, they would certainly not stay. And yet, in recent years, that assumption has been shaken. First, Oumuamua slipped into our solar system in 2017, cutting across the plane of planets with a shape and trajectory no comet or asteroid had ever revealed before. Then, in 2019, 2I Borisov followed, behaving more like a traditional comet but carrying with it the undeniable truth. Interstellar visitors are not as rare as we once believed, and now 3I Atlas has arrived, larger, stranger, and far more unsettling. The laws of orbital mechanics should make its story simple. An object on a hyperbolic trajectory is a wanderer, its eccentricity greater than 1, its energy unbound to the sun. Such bodies do not settle into orbits. They pass through once, perhaps grazing the inner planets, before being flung back into the abyss between stars. That is how the universe works. That is what the textbooks insist. But when astronomers trace Atlas's course, some see something different. A line that does not quite look accidental, a bend that could be more than gravity's hand. And a terrifying question rises like a shadow in the data. What if this is not just a comet burning away its surface, but something performing a maneuver? What if it is slowing down? If that were true, if Atlas is not on its way out but preparing to remain, the implications are almost unbearable to consider. It would mean that what we are witnessing is not merely a natural flyby, but the arrival of a presence. Not a fragment of rock, but something behaving with intention. Something that has decided to watch. The first whispers of this idea spread quietly, buried in research papers and late-night conference conversations. To suggest it openly risks ridicule, yet even the cautious language of scientific caution cannot erase the unease. There is a sense, palpable, unspoken, that this is not just another visitor. If Oumuamua was a question, and Borisov was confirmation, then Atlas might be an answer. But answers are not always comforting. Sometimes they are the beginning of an entirely new problem, and so we return to the fundamental fear. Interstellar objects should not stay. If one does, it will force us to rethink everything we know about the cosmos, and perhaps everything we assume about our safety within it. When scientists first plotted Atlas's trajectory, the initial relief was predictable. Its closest approach would miss Earth by hundreds of millions of kilometers. No direct collision, no catastrophic impact event. The public headlines were reassuring. Harmless visitor from beyond the stars. But those who spend their lives staring at orbital plots, running simulations frame by frame, noticed something that did not feel harmless at all. The track across the solar system looked oddly deliberate. Its angle relative to the ecliptic was almost elegant, as if it had been chosen, not inherited. Its perihelion, its point of closest approach to the sun, was deeper than expected, a brush against the furnace that seemed unnecessary for a frozen body. And then came the subtle variations, the strange discrepancies in speed. Not enough to declare impossible, but enough to keep a gnawing thought alive. What if this is not merely drifting? Comets, of course, can accelerate and deviate slightly due to jets of sublimating gas, but the Atlas jets, when measured, appeared inconsistent with the forces required to explain its curve. Some researchers whispered about non-gravitational accelerations, the same phrase once used for Oumuamua, and one that still lingers in the margins of scientific journals like an unanswered question. If Atlas is slowing down, if even a fraction of its velocity has been deliberately bled away, it changes everything. A natural comet cannot choose. A probe, a machine, a vessel could. And the act of remaining, of refusing to leave when the laws of nature say you must, would be our first undeniable evidence that something intelligent had reached across the void. What would it mean for such a presence to remain in our neighbourhood? The very scale of it is disorienting. Imagine standing on a shoreline expecting driftwood to pass with the tide, but then one piece halts, hovers, and turns to face you. The ocean no longer feels empty, it feels occupied. To scientists, the possibility is both thrilling and horrifying. To governments, it would be destabilizing, even dangerous. The idea that an object from another star system might not only arrive but also decide to stay is a shift of cosmic proportions. It suggests observation, it suggests intent, it suggests that our corner of the galaxy is not anonymous at all, but already on someone's map. And so, Atlas, the third interstellar visitor, forces us to confront a paradox. It should be gone already, slinging outward into the deep. Yet, in the data, there lingers the faint, troubling impression that it has paused, that it has settled into something closer to orbit, that it has chosen proximity over departure. Perhaps it is nothing more than coincidence, the mathematics of chaos playing tricks with our perception. Or perhaps we are living through the moment when the cosmos stopped being indifferent and became attentive, the moment when the dark stopped ignoring us and started watching. Before Atlas unsettled the scientific community, there was Oumuamua, the first recorded interstellar object to pass through our solar system. In many ways, Atlas is not the beginning of this story, but the continuation of a mystery that started in October 2017. Oumuamua appeared without warning, first spotted by astronomers at the Haleakala Observatory in Hawaii. Its name, fittingly Hawaiian, meant scout, or messenger from afar. And that is precisely what it seemed to be, an uninvited visitor from a place we had never touched. At first, astronomers assumed it was a comet. That's the safest category, dirty snowballs that streak into our skies with tails of dust and gas. But Oumuamua stubbornly refused to fit the mould. No visible tail, no coma. Its brightness fluctuated in a way that implied a long, thin, tumbling shape, something like a needle, or a shard, or even a discarded fragment of technology. Estimates suggested it might be 10 times longer than it was wide, unlike any asteroid we had ever catalogued. More troubling were its movements. Oumuamua accelerated slightly as it departed, not in a way gravity alone could explain. Naturalists insisted this must have been due to sublimating gases, jets too faint for us to see. But skeptics pointed out the absence of dust or vapour. Could it have been a solar sail, riding radiation pressure like a ship's canvas catching the wind? Could its slender body have been designed, not random? Harvard astronomer Avi Loeb made headlines when he suggested that possibility, that Oumuamua was artificial, perhaps a probe or fragment from another civilization. His claims were met with fierce resistance, as bold ideas in science often are. But even among critics, a quiet unease remained. Something about Oumuamua was too strange to dismiss entirely. Now, years later, Atlas has arrived. And the comparisons are inevitable. Both objects carry signatures that resist easy explanation. Both forced scientists to create new categories just to describe them, and both whisper the same haunting question. What if these visitors are not accidents but part of a larger pattern? Oumuamua came and went quickly, vanishing before we could point our most powerful telescopes at it. We were left only with fragments of data, like blurred photographs of a figure rushing past in the night. But Atlas is slower, larger, and easier to track. If Oumuamua was a fleeting glimpse of the impossible, Atlas might be the sustained stare that finally tells us the truth. When Oumuamua slipped beyond the reach of our telescopes, it left behind a wound in the scientific imagination. For the first time, humanity had witnessed something truly alien, an object that did not fit, did not behave, did not conform to the tidy boundaries of our models, and then, just as suddenly, it was gone. That absence did something profound. It made the world realize how unprepared we were. By the time Oumuamua was discovered, it was already leaving. We never had the chance to aim the James Webb Space Telescope at it. We never had the time to scramble a probe for a flyby. We were left with nothing but speculation, forever arguing over incomplete data. It was like seeing a silhouette move across your window, then spending years debating whether it was a branch, a bird, or a stranger staring in. But in the years since, something shifted. The discovery of Oumuamua, followed by Borisov, and now Atlas, forced astronomers to expand their vision. Dedicated surveys widened their scope. Models for planetary system formation had to account for the idea that interstellar wanderers might be not rare anomalies but constant silent drifters. Some scientists even suggested the galaxy could be filled with billions of such objects, each carrying within them secrets of distant suns. The connection to Atlas is impossible to ignore. If Oumuamua was the first whisper, then Atlas is the second verse in a message we are only beginning to hear. It is slower, brighter, and, most importantly, still here. Unlike Oumuamua, we have the chance to study it closely. But with that chance comes dread, because the question has evolved. With Oumuamua, it was what is it? With Atlas, it is something darker. What does it want? And if Oumuamua truly was a scout, a messenger, then perhaps Atlas is the follow-up. Perhaps Oumuamua's fleeting visit was never meant to answer our questions, but to ask its own, to measure, to record, to decide. And now, with Atlas, we may be witnessing the next stage. Not a departure, but a pause. Not a glimpse, but a presence. We called Oumuamua Scout. What then do we call the thing that chooses not to leave? If Oumuamua was the scout, then Borisov was the reassurance. Discovered in August 2019 by amateur astronomer Gennady Borisov, the second confirmed interstellar visitor appeared much more familiar. Unlike Oumuamua's needle-like silhouette and puzzling trajectory, 2A Borisov behaved the way a comet should. It sprouted a visible coma, a streaming tail of dust and gas, and its chemistry looked, at least at first glance, like the frozen bodies that orbit our own sun. For scientists still reeling from Oumuamua's strangeness, Borisov felt like a breath of stability. Here, finally, was an interstellar object that fit the textbooks. It was the control sample, the counterbalance that suggested perhaps Oumuamua was just a bizarre outlier. A statistical oddity. Something weird, yes, but not necessarily a signal of intent. And yet, Borisov carried its own quiet anomalies. The ratio of carbon monoxide to water in its tail was far higher than anything in our solar system, suggesting it had formed under alien conditions, far colder, perhaps at the edge of a distant icy disk. Even its dust grains appeared purer, less contaminated by complex organics than comets closer to our sun. Borisov might have looked familiar in shape, but its substance told a deeper story. Worlds beyond ours are chemically different, profoundly so. More importantly, Borisov proved Oumuamua was not alone. The discovery of 2 interstellar visitors in such quick succession shattered the idea that these encounters are once in a lifetime. If 2 could arrive within years, then perhaps the galaxy is filled with them, passing unnoticed, drifting silently, always there. But when Atlas entered the stage, that pattern gained a darker tone. Oumuamua, strange. Borisov, comforting but unusual. Atlas, stranger still and far more unsettling. To some, it no longer looked like chance. It looked like escalation. Perhaps Borisov was not just the ordinary counterexample, but part of a sequence. A way to lull us into thinking interstellar objects were harmless wanderers, only for the next one to break the rules again. Perhaps in retrospect, Borisov was the middle note in a pattern, one that would only make sense when the third chord struck. At first, the story of Borisov seemed simple. A comet, alien-born, drifting into our solar system, shedding dust and ice the way any comet should. But the more astronomers studied it, the more it resisted being reduced to mere proof of normalcy. It was familiar, yes, but it was also a reminder that familiarity is not the same as safety. Borisov's chemistry hinted at conditions unlike anything in our neighbourhood. Its high levels of carbon monoxide suggested it was forged in the frozen outskirts of a star system more extreme than ours. Its dust grains told of pristine formation, a kind of cosmic purity that our solar comets had long since lost. If comets are messengers of their birthplaces, Borisov whispered of an environment we do not yet fully understand. And if we step back, the sequence begins to take on a rhythm. Oumuamua was an enigma, alien in shape and movement. Borisov was reassurance, alien in chemistry but familiar in form. And then came Atlas, stranger still, as though the universe were weaving a narrative. Shock, comfort, escalation. For those inclined towards speculation, Borisov looks less like a random visitor and more like a test case. If Oumuamua was too strange, too quickly dismissed, then Borisov restored balance. See, these objects exist and they can be normal. Only later, when the third visitor arrived, did the pattern reassert itself, more unsettling than before. Perhaps the real lesson of Borisov is not that it was ordinary, but that it primed us to lower our guard. To accept interstellar visitors as natural, expected, even harmless. Which means when Atlas appeared, larger, brighter, impossible to ignore, the stage had already been set. We were ready to look, but maybe not ready for what we might find. In that sense, Borisov was the hinge point in this unfolding cosmic drama. Not the scout, not the stranger, but the bridge, the piece of the puzzle that makes the next act even more disturbing, because if interstellar visitors can come in such quick succession, then Atlas will not be the last, and if it is not leaving, then perhaps the series is no longer about random arrivals at all. Perhaps it is about presence. When astronomers first turned their most powerful instruments toward 3-eye Atlas, they expected to see something familiar. After all, interstellar or not, a comet should behave like a comet. Ice sublimating into gas, dust forming a glowing tail, spectra revealing the common signatures of water, carbon and organic molecules. Instead, Atlas confounded them once again. The Hubble Space Telescope caught the visitor shedding gases that looked wrong. Too much carbon dioxide compared to water. Ratios that didn't fit with any cometary chemistry we had catalogued in our own solar system. If Oumuamua had been strange in shape, Atlas was strange in substance. Its body seemed to come from a realm colder, darker, and more alien than any birthplace we know. The James Webb Space Telescope only deepened the mystery. When its instruments examined Atlas, they confirmed the anomaly, elevated CO2, spectral fingerprints out of balance with natural expectations. The comet wasn't just icy. It was icy in a way that shouldn't be. It was as though the material that made it had been forged under different cosmic rules, in a crucible where chemistry danced to a rhythm unlike our own. For scientists, these numbers were both exhilarating and unnerving. They spoke of planetary systems unlike ours, where comets freeze in exotic ways, preserving records of conditions alien to Earth. Yet, hidden within that exhilaration was unease, because the same oddities that mark Atlas as exotic also leave room for another interpretation. What if its chemistry is not the product of randomness, but of design? Consider this. A body that looks like a comet but contains ratios that make it stand out, screaming for attention across light years. If you were trying to hide a probe in plain sight, would you make it entirely ordinary, or would you seed it with just enough anomalies to ensure it would be noticed, measured, and puzzled over? Atlas's chemistry feels like a calling card, a signature that does not say, look away, but rather look closer. And that is precisely what humanity is doing. Telescopes around the world are locked on Atlas, dissecting its light, tracing its dust, building computer models of its surface and interior. We are studying it as though it were a patient under a microscope, and all the while, the quiet thought lingers. Maybe that is exactly what we were supposed to do. The deeper astronomers probed, the more Atlas refused to fit inside familiar categories. Even its outgassing patterns seemed oddly structured. Jets of material did not emerge uniformly across its surface, but in localized, highly concentrated plumes, almost like controlled exhaust vents. Was this merely the randomness of sublimating ice, or something that hinted at direction, at control? The ratios of carbon dioxide to water ice remained one of the most startling revelations. On Earth, and across most of our solar comets, the dominance of water vapor is clear, but Atlas seemed to invert that relationship. Instead of water leading the chemistry, CO2 was abundant, as though the object carried with it an atmosphere or composition native to a world utterly alien to our own. To planetary scientists, this was a window into formation zones colder than the Kuiper Belt, places where sunlight never reached, where matter froze in peculiar proportions. Yet the skeptics argued, if we can detect such differences so easily, why does Atlas look so conspicuous? For a natural object, anomalies are expected, but they usually scatter across multiple variables. Atlas's imbalance felt deliberate, as though it were waving a flag across the electromagnetic spectrum, almost as if it wanted to be noticed. This thought is not new. Some researchers, quietly, have suggested that one of the simplest ways an advanced civilization could signal its presence is through chemistry, by creating artifacts that mimic natural objects but encode anomalies visible to spectroscopy. No need for radio broadcasts, no need for laser beacons. Just plant an object where others will see it and let its light tell the story. And so, as Atlas sheds its gases into space, leaving a trail of alien fingerprints, the scientific community finds itself split. To some, these readings are the triumph of astronomy, a chance to study the raw material of another star system. To others, they are a riddle, a whisper. A puzzle left hanging in the void. Because if Atlas's chemistry is not random, if it is intentional, then it is more than a comet. It is a message. And if messages can arrive, so too can answers. If chemistry made Atlas suspicious, its motion made it terrifying. For orbital mechanics is not a matter of interpretation, it is mathematics. Objects follow paths defined by gravity, and once their initial velocity and direction are set, their trajectories can be predicted with ruthless precision. That is why interstellar comets are supposed to be simple stories. They arrive, curve around the sun, and leave forever. But Atlas has not behaved with perfect obedience. Small deviations, subtle shifts in velocity have crept into the data. At first they were brushed aside. Outgassing can do that. Jets of sublimating ice nudging a comet this way or that. Yet when scientists attempted to model Atlas's behaviour, the numbers refused to settle. The required jets would have needed to be far stronger than what was observed and oddly aligned to slow the object rather than spin it randomly. And so a thought emerged, quiet at first, then louder in late-night conferences. What if Atlas is not drifting, but manoeuvring? Consider the possibility. A body on a hyperbolic trajectory destined to leave the solar system forever suddenly loses just enough speed to linger. The difference could be slight, almost invisible to the casual observer, but decisive. It would mean that instead of being flung into deep space, Atlas might curve into a bound orbit around the Sun, or worse, around a planet. The implications are staggering. In spaceflight, deceleration is the most difficult task. Any probe sent between the stars would need to shed enormous velocity to remain at its destination. If Atlas is doing that, slowing itself, then we are not looking at a comet at all. We are looking at a machine. The mere suggestion is almost unthinkable, yet it explains what nothing else can. The non-gravitational accelerations that baffled Oumuamua's observers. The strange directional jets that seemed too coordinated for Borisov. And now Atlas, showing signs of the same enigma, but amplified. 3 visitors, 3 deviations. Is this the signature of interstellar randomness, or the fingerprints of intention? Astronomers, cautious by nature, hesitate to say the word maneuver. But for anyone studying spacecraft navigation, the resemblance is hard to ignore. These shifts look less like accidents of ice and rock and more like burns, controlled, chosen, purposeful. If true, then Atlas is no longer just a visitor. It is an arrival. If Atlas is indeed bleeding speed, then we may be witnessing something unprecedented in human history. A foreign object executing the most difficult feat in interstellar navigation. Arrival. Slowing down between stars is nearly impossible for natural bodies. Gravity accelerates them to tens of kilometers per second. Momentum carries them through a system in months or years before they are gone forever. For a machine, however, such velocity is an obstacle to be solved. You would need propulsion, or controlled outgassing, or a sail that rides the light of a star. If Atlas is performing any of these, then it is not a comet, it is a craft. The physics are daunting. To capture into orbit around the Sun, an interstellar visitor must shed enormous kinetic energy. The easiest way to do so would be to use the star itself, swing close, fire engines or vents at perihelion, and let the Sun's pull transform a flyby into capture. This is exactly what some researchers fear Atlas is doing. Its deep dive toward the inner solar system looks less like chance and more like strategy. And then comes the chilling possibility. If Atlas is captured, it will not leave. It will loop again and again, a sentinel in our skies, a permanent fixture of our solar system. Perhaps it will circle the sun. Perhaps it will hover near Earth. Perhaps it will drift into a slow, careful orbit around Mars, watching as humanity takes its first steps outward. The consequences of such a presence are staggering. Imagine telescopes on Earth tracking it year after year, always finding it still there, never gone. Imagine governments forced to admit that an object from another star system has parked itself within sight of our world. Imagine the fear, the panic, the whispers. Who sent it? What is it watching? Why does it remain? And yet, in a strange way, the idea feels almost inevitable. We have been transmitting our presence for over a century, radio waves bleeding into the dark, radar beams flashing outward, spacecraft leaving behind plaques and golden records. Perhaps Atlas is not the first visitor at all. Perhaps it is only the first to stay. If so, then history has turned a corner without us realizing it. The era of cosmic silence may be over, and the era of cosmic presence, the awareness that we are not just observed but observed continuously, may already have begun. Imagine the shockwave if astronomers announced tomorrow that 3i Atlas had not left, that instead of slipping back into interstellar space, it had curved into a bound orbit around our star. Such a thing should not be possible. Every interstellar visitor we know of has come and gone in a matter of months. But if Atlas has found a way to slow down, to capture itself into the grip of the sun, then we are living in a new cosmic era. The first consequence would be surveillance. A body orbiting the sun has a constant vantage point. Depending on its orbital inclination and distance, it could sweep past the inner planets again and again, each pass an opportunity to observe Earth with greater clarity. Unlike satellites we place in predictable orbits, Atlas would be an intruder, an uninvited sentinel, forever drifting where it should not belong. Astronomers would scramble to plot its path, to determine its new orbital period. Would it sweep past Mercury and Venus on the inside track, darting close to the sun like a predator circling a fire? Or would it loop far out, beyond Mars, returning every few years to remind us of its presence? Each scenario is unsettling. A visitor that should have been gone forever becomes a resident, and not one we can ignore. From a scientific perspective, the temptation would be overwhelming. Proposals would emerge overnight for missions to intercept it. Space agencies would draft plans for robotic explorers, even crewed expeditions to rendezvous with the interstellar body and probe its surface. But if Atlas is not natural, if it is technology disguised as rock, then approaching it could be far more dangerous than inspiring. What if it resists? What if it responds? Meanwhile, the public reaction would fracture along familiar lines. Some would celebrate the permanence of a cosmic mystery in our skies. Others would panic at the thought of something alien choosing to remain. Governments would be caught in the middle, forced to decide whether to treat Atlas as a scientific opportunity or a national security threat. Above it all would linger the most haunting question: why here? Why now? Why stay? If Atlas were truly captured by the sun's gravity, our solar system would never feel the same again. Its orbit would become part of our celestial map, charted alongside the planets and asteroids, but carrying a different weight, an uninvited reminder that we are not alone. Over decades, its presence would redefine how humanity looks outward. Each return near Earth would bring a fresh wave of attention, scientists updating orbital models, governments renewing their warnings, the public wondering if the silence around it masks something more. Unlike comets, which come and go on timescales that blur into centuries, Atlas's persistence would feel immediate, almost intimate. It would not be a visitor anymore, it would be a neighbour. The practical implications are staggering. Navigation systems would begin to account for Atlas as a permanent body. Missions to Mars, to the asteroid belt, even to Jupiter would calculate their paths with an awareness that another interstellar traveller lurks in our neighbourhood. And sooner or later, one nation, or perhaps all, would send a probe. Curiosity would demand it. But that curiosity could carry risks. If Atlas is simply ice and rock, we will finally know. If it is something more, if it reacts, transmits, or changes behaviour when approached, then humanity's first encounter may unfold not in secrecy, but in the blinding glare of the sun, where all the world can watch. Philosophically, the impact would run even deeper, for centuries. We believed the heavens beyond our solar system were distant and untouchable, separated from us by gulfs too wide to bridge. Interstellar visitors were curiosities, not companions. But a captured atlas would be proof that the galaxy's threads can intertwine, that something from another star can make our skies its home. And through all of this, one thought would persist like a drumbeat. Objects from other star systems are not supposed to stay. If one has, then perhaps it stayed for a reason. And perhaps that reason has less to do with the sun's gravity, and more to do with us. If Atlas did not settle around the sun, another possibility presents itself, one that chills and fascinates in equal measure: Mars. Of all the planets in our solar system, Mars is the most strategically significant for humanity's future. It is the world we dream of colonizing, the outpost where our species may one day plant its second home. Space agencies across the globe are preparing missions, robotic and crude, that will transform the red planet from a distant curiosity into a frontier. And so, if Atlas were to linger near Mars, it would not be a random coincidence. It would be a choice. The Martian orbit offers many advantages for a watcher. From its position, Atlas could observe Earth with relative ease, while also monitoring the progress of our spacecraft, rovers, and, eventually, human settlers. Unlike Earth, Mars has no dense radio chatter masking its surface. Our transmissions from rovers and orbiters would stand out sharply in the silence of the Martian desert. To an intelligence studying us, Mars is the ideal listening post. The thought is unsettling. Imagine a probe circling Mars year after year, a silent sentinel watching as the first human colonies take shape. Every rocket landing, every greenhouse inflated, every message beamed back to Earth, witnessed by something that does not belong. Our expansion into space would feel less like pioneering and more like stepping onto a stage where an audience already waits. Scientists would rush to explain the coincidence away. They would insist Atlas's trajectory happened to intersect Mars's orbit by chance. But chance begins to fray when the outcome is so perfectly symbolic. Mars is humanity's dream, our next step outward, and Atlas choosing to linger there would feel like a response. We see you. We are watching. It raises a deeper possibility. If these interstellar objects are more than rock and ice, if they are part of a chain of reconnaissance, then Mars may already be marked not as our outpost, but as theirs. A testing ground, a vantage point, a place where the boundary between observer and observed will blur forever. If Atlas remained in the Martian system, its presence would reverberate through every aspect of human ambition. Mars has always been more than a planet. It is a mirror for our hopes, a testbed for our future. But what if it were also chosen as a stage by something not human? Imagine the first astronauts stepping onto Martian soil, their boots pressing into rust-red dust, while above them hangs an interstellar sentinel. Each communication back to Earth would pass through space where Atlas drifts, each signal perhaps intercepted, studied, stored. Colonization would no longer feel like humanity's triumph, but like humanity stepping under the gaze of an examiner. Every greenhouse inflated, every habitat expanded, would feel less like progress and more like an answer to a question we did not know was asked. The symbolism is chilling. Earth is the cradle, but Mars is the threshold. To settle it is to declare ourselves a multi-planetary species. And if Atlas waits there, its orbit lingering like a silent nod, then the message is unmistakable. Your next step has been noticed, perhaps even anticipated. Strategically, Mars is the perfect choice for a long-term outpost. It is close enough to Earth for monitoring, but far enough to remain beyond our easy reach. A probe circling Mars could observe two worlds at once: Earth's noisy, thriving civilization and Mars's fragile, newborn outposts. To a distant intelligence, this arrangement would be efficient, one vantage point for two laboratories of life. The human response would be fractured. Scientists would insist on studying Atlas more closely, seeing in it the opportunity of a lifetime. Governments, however, would weigh risk against reward. How much could they reveal to the public without sparking fear? And pioneers on Mars would live beneath its gaze every day, wondering whether their colony was a bold step outward or an experiment unfolding under alien observation. In that light, Atlas circling Mars is no longer a coincidence. It is a choice that cuts to the heart of our destiny. Because if it stays there, then Mars is not just humanity's frontier. it becomes a meeting ground. A place where the path of a young civilization intersects with the watchful silence of something unimaginably older. Now imagine another outcome, not Atlas settling into a wide solar orbit, not even choosing Mars as its stage. Instead, picture it slipping into a path that allows continuous, deliberate surveillance of Earth. From this vantage, the visitor becomes something far more unsettling than a curiosity. It becomes an eye, a presence that turns our home world into a specimen beneath constant watch. For decades, humanity has dreamed of observing exoplanets, straining to glimpse atmospheric signatures of life around distant suns. But what if the same thing is happening here? Only we are the ones being studied. Technically, the idea is chillingly plausible. A body in the right orbit could track Earth's rotation, monitor the glow of our cities, intercept our radio noise. Its instruments, if it carried them, would not need to beam signals across the galaxy. They would only need to drift silently overhead, listening. Every burst of radar, every satellite uplink, every faint whisper of data leaking into space would be gathered, catalogued, and perhaps transmitted elsewhere. For us, such surveillance would feel invisible at first. After all, Atlas still looks like a comet, a fractured, icy husk casting gas into space. But under that disguise, if there were machinery, the effect would be staggering. Earth would no longer be a planet turning freely under an indifferent sky. It would be a monitored system, our every action recorded in the cosmic equivalent of a logbook. And here lies the most disturbing symmetry. We already do this. Humanity has filled Earth's orbit with satellites, each one watching, measuring, tracking. We observe weather, we count ships, we map forests, we spy on each other. If we, barely a type of civilization, deploy swarms of eyes around our planet, is it really so implausible that a Type 2 or Type 3 civilization might do the same, on scales we cannot yet comprehend? The thought is difficult to escape. Atlas may not be a messenger or even a probe. It may be a satellite, an orbital watcher, and its target may not be the solar system as a whole. Its target may be us. If Atlas positioned itself into a long-term orbit that allowed constant monitoring of Earth, the psychological impact alone would be seismic. For centuries, we have looked at the night sky and believed ourselves unobserved, explorers in a vast, silent cosmos. But under Atlas's gaze, that illusion shatters. We would know, with every broadcast, every rocket launch, every signal sent into the dark, that something might be listening. The first reaction would be denial. Scientists would argue fiercely for natural explanations, cometary jets, chaotic paths, gravitational coincidences. Governments would reassure the public that Atlas is harmless, a scientific curiosity at worst. But as the years passed and its orbit refused to fade, the narrative would change. People would look up, knowing it had chosen not to leave. The question would no longer be whether Atlas was natural, but why it remained. The technological implications would be terrifying. Our entire planet radiates signals, military radar, satellite uplinks, television broadcasts, GPS pings, even the faint hum of power grids. An object stationed nearby could capture it all, painting a complete map of human civilization without us ever consenting. Every launch site, every city, every ship at sea, all reduced to data in the archives of something older and far more advanced. And yet, there would also be awe, because Atlas's presence would be proof that the galaxy is not empty, proof that civilizations can travel between the stars, proof that the long silence may not have been silence at all but waiting. In classrooms and coffee shops, philosophers and poets would begin to ask, are we the experiment? Is Earth already part of a study too vast for us to comprehend? Eventually humanity would face a choice. Do we reach out, sending signals directly to Atlas in an attempt to force a response? Or do we remain quiet, hoping that our watcher remains just that, a silent observer, content to watch and never to act? Either decision would carry weight measured not in years or decades, but in millennia. Because if Atlas is truly orbiting us, then the story of humanity's future is no longer one we write alone. For many astronomers, the most unsettling aspect of Atlas is not just its chemistry, or even its suspicious trajectory. It is the possibility that the entire body itself may be a disguise. What if Atlas is not a comet at all, but a vessel wrapped in the cloak of natural debris? The idea sounds like science fiction, yet it carries a cold logic. If an advanced civilization wanted to send probes between the stars, why not hide them inside husks of ice and rock? Such camouflage would serve multiple purposes: protection against radiation, a thermal shield against interstellar cold, and most importantly, plausible deniability. To the first observers who spot it, the probe looks like a comet, harmless, ordinary, unworthy of alarm. Only under closer inspection would the mask begin to slip. This hypothesis gains weight when we examine Atlas's anomalies. Its high levels of carbon dioxide, so out of step with solar system comets, might not be an accident of formation but a deliberate fingerprint, something chosen to make it stand out to spectroscopy, a way of saying, "Notice me." Its strange jets could be not sublimating ice, but controlled vents, microthrusters hidden inside the language of cometary behavior. Even its broken, fragmented body could serve a purpose, like decoys peeling away to confuse observers while the core hides deeper within. And here is the unnerving part. We would have no way to know. Our telescopes can measure spectra and brightness, but they cannot peel away the surface to see what lies beneath. A probe hidden inside a cometary shell would be indistinguishable from nature itself, until it chose to reveal otherwise. If Atlas is such a device, then its arrival was not random. It was directed. And if it has slowed, if it has chosen to remain, then the masquerade has succeeded. Humanity is now watching it with every telescope we own, dedicating time, resources, and attention. We think we are studying it. Perhaps in reality it is studying us. If Atlas were truly a machine masquerading as a comet, the implications would ripple through every layer of human understanding. Suddenly, the cosmos would not just be a place of natural wonder, but of engineered deception. We would have to accept that our first confirmed long-term interstellar neighbour is not a product of chance, but of intent. Consider what that would mean for history. For decades, SETI has aimed radio telescopes at the stars, listening for signals. Yet what if the first signal was never a broadcast at all, but a disguised object sent physically into our system? A probe that hides inside rock and ice, protected by camouflage, designed to appear as something mundane until the right moment. In that light, Atlas would not just be a visitor, it would be the answer to a question we didn't even know how to ask. And then comes the most terrifying scenario. What if it has been done before? If civilizations can cloak their probes as natural objects, then how many comets and asteroids in our skies are truly what they seem? How many of the rocks catalogued in dusty observatories could conceal something watching, recording, waiting? Our assumption that nature and technology can always be told apart might itself be naive. From a strategic perspective, the disguise makes sense. A probe hidden inside a comet would be dismissed by primitive civilizations as nothing more than ice and dust. Only once those civilizations advanced, once they built telescopes, once they started noticing discrepancies, would the riddle unfold. Perhaps this is part of the test, to see which species are curious enough, skeptical enough to peel back the mask. But here is the most unsettling thought of all. If Atlas is technology hidden in plain sight, then the masquerade has already succeeded. We are watching it obsessively, pointing our best instruments at it, dedicating time and energy to solving its puzzle. We think we are interrogating Atlas. Perhaps Atlas is interrogating us. Every measurement we make, every signal we beam to study it, is also a signal we reveal about ourselves. And so, the hypothesis closes in on its most unnerving implication. If Atlas is a probe, then we are already in contact. Not through language or light, but through observation and curiosity. By treating it as an object of study, we are participating in its experiment. And maybe, just maybe, that was the point all along. For every unsettling anomaly that surrounds Atlas, there are scientists standing firmly on the side of caution. To them, the object is strange, yes, but strangeness does not mean artificiality. Nature, after all, has had billions of years and trillions of chances to produce rare combinations of chemistry and motion. To leap from unusual to alien probe is a step that many insist we must never take lightly. The first line of defense is cometary physics. Outgassing, they argue, can explain much of Atlas's odd behavior. As sunlight heats volatile ices, jets erupt. These can push an object in seemingly directed ways, especially if the vents are localized. Our models may not fully capture this chaos, but that does not mean it is engineered. It only means we do not yet understand the full spectrum of cometary mechanics. The second counter-argument is statistical. The discoveries of Oumuamua, Borisov, and now Atlas may not be a deliberate sequence, but simply the natural result of improved sky surveys. Telescopes today are vastly more sensitive than those of even 2 decades ago. The pattern we perceive could just be the first hints of a population that has always been there, interstellar wanderers drifting endlessly between the stars. The fact that we only recently noticed them may say more about us than about them, and then there is the burden of proof. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. If we are to declare Atlas a probe, then we must present data that cannot be explained any other way. So far, while anomalies abound, none is definitive. Elevated CO2 ratios, strange accelerations, unusual trajectories, all of these may be puzzles, but puzzles are not proof. A single natural mechanism we do not yet understand could resolve them. The skeptics remind us of history. In 1967, astronomers detected a pulsing radio signal with perfect regularity. For a brief, electric moment, they wondered if it was alien intelligence. They even nicknamed it LGM-1, Little Green Men 1. But in time, it became clear. It was the first pulsar, a spinning neutron star with physics stranger than we had ever imagined. Nature, not intelligence, had written the signal. Might Atlas be the same? And finally, they warn against projection. Humans are quick to see intention where none exists, to imagine faces in clouds, or meaning in random noise. Perhaps Atlas is not a messenger, not a sentinel, not a probe, but simply what it appears to be, a piece of frozen rock and gas cast adrift by a distant sun, caught briefly in our attention before drifting on. To many scientists, the excitement around Atlas reveals more about human imagination than about the object itself. They remind us that the history of astronomy is filled with moments where anomalies provoked wild speculation, only to be resolved later by natural explanations. Think of the WOW signal of 1977, a 72-second radio transmission near the hydrogen line. So strong and clean it looked exactly like the signal SETI had always hoped for. It inspired decades of fascination. Yet despite endless follow-up searches, it was never repeated, and its origin remains unknown. Some now suspect it was nothing more than a reflection of Earth's own transmissions. Others cling to the mystery. But the lesson stands: one unexplained event does not equal proof of intelligence. The same, skeptics argue, must apply to Atlas. Elevated carbon dioxide ratios may reflect conditions in a distant protoplanetary disk, not design. Deviations in its path may be jets of gas acting in ways we don't yet fully model, not propulsion. Its timing, arriving after Oumuamua and Borisov, may feel like a pattern to us, but could just be the natural statistics of a universe filled with wanderers. These counter-arguments are not meant to extinguish wonder, but to preserve rigor. If humanity proclaims every anomaly as alien, we risk turning science into myth, and worse, we risk missing the deeper lessons nature is trying to teach us about planetary systems, cometary chemistry, and the birth of worlds. Yet even the skeptics admit something important. Anomalies force us to grow. The pulsar taught us new physics. The WOW signal reminded us of our limitations. Oumuamua expanded our awareness of interstellar objects. Borisov revealed alien chemistry. Atlas too will leave its mark, whether natural or not. In the end, the counter-arguments circle back to a sobering truth. Without undeniable evidence, without a repeatable signal, or a probe we can touch, or technology we can detect, we cannot declare Atlas anything more than a comet. But as long as the anomalies remain, as long as the data resists tidy explanation, the door stays open. And behind that door lies both our greatest hope and our deepest fear. There is another way to look at Atlas, not as a rock, not as a probe, but as a message. In this view, Atlas is not here by accident, nor is it here to observe or to linger as a machine might. Instead, its very arrival is the signal. The trajectory, the timing, the chemistry. These are not side effects, but components of a coded broadcast written in the language of celestial mechanics. Humanity has tried something similar before. In 1974, the Arecibo Observatory aimed a radio telescope at the star cluster M13 and transmitted nuances and 179 bits of information. To us, those numbers formed a message. Binary code describing our DNA, our solar system, even the outlines of human beings. To any recipient, the fact of the transmission itself was the message, "We are here." What if Atlas is the same? A physical carrier wave across the gulf of space, a deliberate insertion into our solar system, timed not just to pass through, but to be noticed. The elevated CO2 levels, the trajectory bending toward deeper perihelion, the sequence following Oumuamua and Borisov, could these be the equivalent of binary digits strung together to form a pattern? If so, then Atlas is not a comet in disguise, nor a vessel in waiting. It is an artifact of communication. A cosmic message in a bottle, but one whose code cannot be read on paper. Instead, the universe itself is the canvas, and the only way to interpret it is through careful, relentless observation. The unsettling truth is that such a message might not even be meant for us. It could be a beacon for other civilizations, a marker planted along the spiral arm of the Milky Way. We may only be eavesdroppers, catching sight of something not intended for our eyes, and yet, if we can see it, then perhaps we were meant to. Because in the end, the simplest message is the most profound. You are not alone. If Atlas is a message, then humanity faces a problem more profound than physics: interpretation. How do you decode a transmission written not in bits or syllables, but in orbital arcs and chemical ratios? How do you read intention in the silence of a comet's coma, or meaning in the way it bends toward the sun? We built SETI with the assumption that alien communication would resemble ours: radio pulses, maybe lasers, signals that could be charted as on-off, 1-0. But what if the message is not electromagnetic at all? What if it is physical, an object placed in our path carrying information not as code, but as presence? Some suggest the message might be redundancy itself: Oumuamua, Borisov, Atlas, 3 in succession. Perhaps the sequence is the statement: we are here, again and again. If so, then every new interstellar object is another syllable in a cosmic word. Perhaps we are meant to piece them together like letters, forming a sentence whose grammar is written in arrivals. Others argue the chemistry is the key: elevated CO2 levels, absent water lines, unexpected signatures, a deliberate imbalance designed to stand out against background norms. To us, the oddity is an anomaly. To them, it may be the equivalent of carving words into stone, unmistakable, if only we know how to read. There is, of course, the possibility that the message is not meant for us at all. Civilizations separated by thousands of light years could scatter such artifacts as milestones, navigational beacons, or interstellar graffiti. We were here. We may have stumbled onto someone else's signal, written not for humanity but for the next traveller passing this way. Yet even if unintended, the effect is the same. Atlas forces us to confront the possibility that communication need not come as language, but as event. That sometimes the most powerful message is not encoded in symbols, but in action. That an object crossing into your home star system and refusing to leave is itself a sentence we cannot ignore. If so, then the message has already been delivered. It reads, simply and terrifyingly, "You are seen." If Atlas is a message, then perhaps it did not come uninvited. Perhaps in a sense we called it here. For more than a century, Earth has been leaking signals into the void. What began as faint local transmissions, spark gap experiments, Morse code bursts, soon grew into an expanding bubble of electromagnetic noise. By the 1920s, radio carried voices across oceans. By the 1950s, television towers were beaming sitcoms skyward. Every radar ping aimed at Venus, every planetary mapping pulse, every broadcast of news, sports, or music, all of it has slipped past our atmosphere at the speed of light, spreading outward like ripples in a cosmic pond. Astronomers call this invisible sphere our radio bubble. Today it extends nearly 130 light-years in every direction, a ghostly halo of human chatter announcing our presence to any listener in the neighbourhood. Inside that sphere are thousands of stars, many with planets. If even a fraction hosts civilizations, then humanity has not been silent. We have been broadcasting our existence loudly, relentlessly, for more than a century, without permission, without strategy, without thought of consequence. What if Atlas is the reply? Not a comet at all, but a response to the noise of our civilization, a physical signal saying, "Message received." The parallels are eerie. We sent plaques on Pioneer, golden records on Voyager, radio signals from Arecibo, all deliberate gestures into the dark. Yet the vast majority of our emissions have been accidental. Baseball games, sitcoms, war broadcasts, radar pulses strong enough to sweep across the galaxy. To us they were mundane. To someone else they may have been a beacon, irresistible in their clarity. Imagine another civilization, quietly listening from a nearby star. For them, our first television shows would have arrived like a sudden flare in the night, structured, patterned, impossible to mistake for natural sources. Perhaps. Decades later they chose to respond, not with radio, but with something far harder to ignore. A visitor, a body crossing into our system at just the right time to be noticed. And so the unsettling symmetry emerges. We shouted into the dark, and now, perhaps, the dark has shouted back. Our unintentional broadcast to the stars is perhaps humanity's most profound act of vulnerability. Unlike the carefully curated messages we sent through Pioneer and Voyager, our radio bubble is unfiltered. It carries not the best of us, but the raw truth, laughter and music, but also war reports and propaganda. To any listener, we are not a united species, but a noisy, conflicted one. Our entire character spilled across the spectrum. The scale of this bubble is difficult to imagine. Each year it expands another light year in radius, racing outward at 300,000 kilometers per second. Within its reach are over 2,000 stars, many of them hosting planets in habitable zones. To civilizations there, Earth would already be unmistakable, a small rocky planet bathed in the strange structured signals of a technological species. No pulsar or quasar emits in the patterns of sitcom dialogues or sports broadcasts. No natural source carries the fingerprint of modulation and rhythm that defines radio and television. And so, if Atlas is not coincidence, then its timing becomes suspicious. Oumuamua appeared just as the first century of our radio emissions reached into interstellar space. Borisov followed, a reminder that interstellar wanderers are common, and Atlas arrived just as our bubble engulfed some of the most promising nearby systems. Perhaps the sequence is not random at all. Perhaps it is reply, reconnaissance, confirmation. If so, then we may already be part of a dialogue measured not in years, but in centuries. Our broadcasts were the opening line. These objects may be the answer, and in that exchange lies a truth both exhilarating and terrifying. Once you announce yourself to the galaxy, you cannot take it back. The bubble cannot be reversed. The signals cannot be recalled. For better or worse, Earth has spoken. Which leaves the question hanging over us like a shadow. If Atlas is indeed a response to our noise, then what comes next? Do we remain silent, hoping to fade back into anonymity? Or do we speak again, this time deliberately, knowing that the galaxy is no longer listening in theory, but in practice? Because if Atlas is here because of us, then the age of cosmic solitude is already over. The silence we once thought eternal has been broken, not by their voices, but by ours. If Atlas is not just passing through, then the implications ripple far beyond orbital mechanics. It forces us to ask a chilling but necessary question. What is the timeline of contact? Humanity has long imagined first contact as sudden, ships appearing in the skies, or a signal blasting across all frequencies. But the reality may be more subtle, stretched across decades or centuries, unfolding in stages so gradual that we barely notice them until it's too late. The first stage, arguably, has already happened, our leak into the cosmos. For over a century, Earth has been bleeding information, television broadcasts, radar pulses, and the chatter of a restless species. By now, thousands of nearby stars have been bathed in this expanding bubble of noise. Any intelligence with sufficient sensitivity could already map our culture, our conflicts, even our weaknesses. The second stage may be what we are living through now, the reconnaissance phase. Oumuamua in 2017, Borisov in 2019, and now Atlas in 2025. 3 interstellar visitors in less than a decade, after billions of years of apparent silence. Coincidence, or a pattern? If these objects are probes, then they are the scouts, silent, unassuming, hidden behind the camouflage of natural physics. Their purpose would not be conquest, but assessment. What is this species? What level of technology do they wield? Are they worth engaging or extinguishing? The third stage is what terrifies SETI researchers the most, the test. If Atlas is truly deciding to stay, then its trajectory will shift subtly, not to collide with Earth, but to linger in the solar system, to observe more closely. That moment, if it comes, will be unmistakable. The day the universe stops being a passive backdrop and becomes an actor in our story, and beyond that. The fourth stage is speculation itself, the response. Not necessarily a message in our language, but a change in behaviour, a signal sent back along the hydrogen line, or an object deliberately redirected toward our world. A reply we might not understand but cannot ignore. This timeline may already be ticking forward. The question is not if contact will occur, but whether we will recognise it when it does, or whether in our arrogance we will miss the moment entirely. If Atlas decides to stay, the signs will not be theatrical explosions of light or an unmistakable broadcast across the heavens. Instead, they will emerge as subtle deviations, footprints left in the language of physics, small enough to dismiss as coincidence, yet persistent enough to unsettle. The first clue would be anomalies in trajectory. Natural objects follow predictable orbital paths, determined by gravity and solar radiation. If Atlas lingers where no comet should, adjusts its arc in ways that cannot be explained by outgassing or thermal effects astronomers would notice. It may not be a dramatic course correction, but the tiniest non-gravitational acceleration, like the one that puzzled scientists studying Oumuamua. The second clue would appear in spectral data. When sunlight reflects off an object, it tells us about its surface composition. If the chemistry of Atlas contradicts everything we know, strange alloys, impossible emission lines, or energy signatures inconsistent with natural ice and dust, then the suspicion of artifice becomes unavoidable. The third warning would come from radio silence, or the breaking of it. Right now, telescopes scan the hydrogen line at 1.42 GS, listening for artificial narrowband signals. So far, nothing. But silence itself could be a tactic, a probe designed only to observe, never to reveal itself. If, however, a pulse arrives, brief, sharp, perfectly structured, then the universe's quiet will be shattered in an instant. One signal is all it would take. The fourth and most chilling sign would not come from the heavens but from here on Earth: interference. If Atlas is listening, it might begin to interact with our broadcasts, returning faint echoes, distortions, or patterns that suggest a dialogue. Imagine a baseball game broadcast, reflected back with missing fragments, or a radar ping that returns not with the expected bounce, but with modulation, an artificial fingerprint. We would know, without doubt, that someone was answering, and so the question becomes not whether Atlas stays, but whether we will have the wisdom to notice these signs before it is too late. Because the greatest danger of contact is not hostility, it is complacency. It is assuming that nothing unusual is happening, when in fact history is already turning beneath our feet. If Atlas lingers, then the timeline of contact is not theoretical anymore. It has already begun. The clock is ticking, not on when we will meet another intelligence, but on whether we will recognize it before it recognizes us. If Atlas remains within our solar system, its presence will demand interpretation. Yet the meaning of that presence could swing between extremes, between benign curiosity and existential threat. To frame this, scientists and philosophers alike often divide the possibilities into scenarios. The first scenario is the harmless watcher. In this view, Atlas would be no more than an instrument, an automated scout sent long ago by a distant civilization. Its mission might be purely observational, to gather data about planetary systems, catalogue chemical compositions, and perhaps evaluate technological activity. To us, it might seem menacing, but to its creators, it could be routine. Much as we send probes to Jupiter or Saturn, they send probes to random stars. If so, then Atlas is not about Earth at all. It is simply about curiosity. The second scenario is the silent survey. Here, Atlas is not random, but deliberate. It would have adjusted course because it detected our signals, our radio bubble reaching its creators. Its role would be reconnaissance, mapping our emissions and judging whether humanity is worth further interaction. This scenario is more unsettling because it suggests awareness. It implies that someone out there not only heard us but has already acted on that knowledge. The third scenario is the harbinger. Atlas would then be not just a scout but an advance element. Its presence could prepare the way for something else, a fleet, a message, or a demonstration of capability. If this is true, then Atlas staying would not be a passive act, but an active step in a larger timeline of engagement. We would not be witnessing coincidence but sequence. And the fourth scenario, the most disturbing, is the silent invader. In this, Atlas itself is the payload. Not a comet, not even a probe, but a form of technology designed to infiltrate. Perhaps it carries self-replicating machines, dormant until activated. Perhaps it seeds information into our environment, or waits silently for our curiosity to bring us closer. This is the nightmare vision, the object that masquerades as natural until it is too late. Between these possibilities lies the razor's edge of our future. The same object can be interpreted as harmless or hostile depending on how we choose to read its silence, and silence after all can be the most deceptive signal of all. If Atlas remains, each scenario carries its own set of consequences, ranging from benign curiosity to existential risk. Let's walk through them one by one. 1. The harmless watcher. If Atlas is simply a probe cataloguing the galaxy, then humanity is merely incidental. It might collect atmospheric data, record radio chatter, and then transmit its findings home, or perhaps never transmit at all, functioning only as a drifting archive. Outcome: humanity remains safe. Implication: we are not special, merely another data point in a vast cosmic census. Atlas's decision to stay would not be about us, but about its programming. 2. The silent survey. If Atlas is here because it heard us, the consequences become more intimate. It would imply an intelligence has already noticed our presence and chosen to investigate. Outcome: humanity is under scrutiny. Implication: our culture, technologies, and even flaws could be analysed in real time. The danger here is not immediate destruction, but vulnerability. We would be exposed, unable to control the image we project to the stars. 3. The harbinger. If Atlas is an advance element, then its presence is a prelude. It may relay information, mark our system as occupied, or prepare the way for a second wave. Outcome: humanity becomes a target of interest. Implication: this would not be neutral. A decision has been made elsewhere to engage us, whether as potential allies, subjects, or adversaries. Every move Atlas makes would foreshadow something larger on the horizon. 4. The silent invader. The darkest scenario: Atlas itself is the payload. It may carry dormant machines, alien biochemistry, or digital constructs waiting to awaken. In this case, its staying is not observation but occupation. Outcome: existential risk. Implication: by the time we recognize the truth, it may be too late. A single probe could spread autonomous systems across our solar system, invisible to us until their presence becomes overwhelming. In this scenario, Atlas would not just change our understanding of the universe, it could end our story within it. What unites these scenarios is the silence of Atlas. For now, it tells us nothing. But in its stillness lies ambiguity, and in ambiguity lies danger. Until we can prove what it is, every possibility remains open, from the benign to the catastrophic. And so humanity finds itself trapped in the waiting game, staring at a visitor whose intentions are unreadable, but whose very presence has already changed us. If Atlas chooses to remain, the gravitational effects may be negligible, but the psychological weight upon humanity would be immense. The presence of an interstellar visitor that lingers is not merely an astronomical curiosity. It becomes a mirror held up to our species, reflecting fears, hopes, and divisions we have long carried within us. 1. Governments and national security. For world powers, Atlas would instantly become a matter of defense. Intelligence agencies would debate whether it is benign or hostile. Militaries might push for contingency plans, even though no weapon on Earth could meaningfully alter its behavior. The Cold War paranoia of UFOs would return, amplified by modern technology and 24-hour media cycles. Nations would race to claim observation rights, perhaps even attempt missions to study or capture fragments of it, turning Atlas into the most contested object in human history. 2. Scientific community. For scientists, Atlas would represent the dream and dread of SETI combined. Decades of abstract theorizing about alien contact would suddenly feel immediate and practical. Careers would pivot overnight to study its every photon, every spectrum, every trajectory. Yet with that excitement comes fear. What if data confirms artificiality? How do scientists present evidence that could collapse worldviews, destabilize economies, and inflame political tensions? The burden of proof would feel crushing, every word measured, every claim scrutinized. 3. Religion and philosophy. For religious traditions, Atlas would be interpreted through ancient texts and beliefs. Some would proclaim it a sign from the divine, an angelic or apocalyptic messenger. Others would see it as validation of cosmic plurality long imagined in mysticism. But there would also be fear. The realization that humanity is not the center of creation could fracture faith communities, or ignite schisms between those who embrace the idea of others and those who reject it as heresy. 4. Culture and collective imagination. For ordinary people, Atlas would bleed into dreams, anxieties, and art. Films, music, and literature would surge to grapple with its meaning. Social media would oscillate between memes and hysteria, half in jest, half in dread. Conspiracy theories would thrive, claiming governments know the truth and conceal it. At the same time, many would romanticize it, turning Atlas into a symbol of hope, the long-awaited proof that we're not alone. And beneath all these responses, a subtle tension would rise. The realization that humanity's timeline is no longer ours alone. Our story has entered the awareness of another, and whether Atlas is silent, indifferent, or watchful, its very presence ensures that humanity can never again think of itself as isolated in the universe. If Atlas lingers, the hardest burden will not be scientific or political, it will be psychological. Humanity has always feared the unknown, but this would not be an abstract unknown. It would hang in the night sky, visible through telescopes, reminding us that something is here, watching. 1. The rise of cosmic anxiety. A new syndrome would spread. Cosmic anxiety. Unlike everyday fears of war or climate change, this fear would be existential, diffuse, and uncontrollable. People would lie awake at night imagining that Atlas is studying them, judging their species, or planning something unfathomable. Therapists and philosophers would find themselves dealing not with personal trauma, but with universal dread, the weight of humanity's smallness pressed into the mind of the individual. 2. Apocalyptic fears. Inevitably, some would interpret Atlas as an omen of the end. Prophets of doom would seize the narrative, claiming it signals apocalypse. Social movements could form around survivalism, encouraging people to withdraw from society, hoard supplies, or seek safety underground. Even without evidence of danger, the simple ambiguity of Atlas's silence would be enough to trigger waves of panic. Markets might collapse overnight if a rumour suggested it is changing course. Fear, more than the object itself, could destabilise civilization. 3. The hopeful vision. But not everyone would despair. Some would see Atlas as salvation rather than threat. If it is truly a probe from an ancient civilization, then perhaps it carries wisdom, technology, or even the chance of rescue from our self-inflicted crises. Environmentalists might frame it as a cosmic warning, a reminder to protect our fragile planet. Dreamers might envision alliances, interstellar kinship, or even an invitation to join a galactic community. For them, Atlas is not the harbinger of destruction, but the promise of transcendence. 4. The cultural schism. This duality, terror versus hope, would fracture cultures and nations. Governments would be torn between secrecy and disclosure. Citizens would divide into those demanding preparation for contact and those insisting on silence to avoid provoking it. The debate would rage in headlines, sermons, and family dinners. Is Atlas the end or the beginning? And yet, beneath all these narratives, one truth would remain. Humanity's sense of isolation would be gone forever. Whether we feared it or welcomed it, whether we saw it as doom or destiny, Atlas's lingering presence would become part of our collective identity. From that moment onward, every human life would unfold beneath the shadow of the same unspoken reality. We are no longer alone. If Atlas lingers, humanity would confront one of the most consequential choices in its history. Should we respond, or should we remain silent? This dilemma, known within the SETI community as the divide between passive SETI and active SETI, MITI messaging extraterrestrial intelligence, has haunted scientists for decades. With Atlas above us, it would no longer be theoretical. 1. The case for silence. Those who favour silence argue from caution. They point out that humanity has never encountered a more advanced civilization, and that in every historical analogy, contact between unequal societies has been catastrophic for the weaker one. To send a message is to expose ourselves deliberately, to highlight our presence, our coordinates, our capabilities. If Atlas is merely observing, then silence maintains ambiguity. If it is hostile, then silence at least delays our exposure. And if it is neutral, silence gives us time to study before acting. To proponents of caution, sending a deliberate signal would be reckless, a cosmic equivalent of a child shouting into a dark forest without knowing who or what lurks among the trees. 2. The case for replying. Others argue that silence is futile. Humanity has already announced itself through a century of uncontrolled broadcasts. The radio bubble expanding at the speed of light has already betrayed us. If Atlas is truly listening, then it already knows who we are. In this view, replying is not provocation, but honesty. A deliberate message would allow us to craft a better representation of our species, rather than leaving Atlas to judge us only by sitcom reruns and wartime propaganda. Proponents claim that refusing to speak is cowardice, and that contact is inevitable anyway. Carl Sagan once put it bluntly, "If we do not speak, we may never be heard." For advocates of METI, staying silent is not safety, it is stagnation. 3. The split in humanity. This divide would fracture governments, institutions, and even families. Some nations would press to transmit a grand message, perhaps through Arecibo's successors or deep space arrays. Others would pass laws forbidding intentional transmission, warning that it is not a scientific decision, but a political one that risks every human life. The debate would not be academic, it would be existential, because once Atlas has decided to stay, humanity is no longer a passive spectator. We are an actor in a dialogue we cannot escape. If Atlas decides to stay, humanity's choice between speaking or remaining silent becomes more than philosophical. It becomes practical. What would each path truly look like? If we choose to reply, the first question is what to say. Do we send mathematics, assuming numbers are the universal language? Do we transmit images, as with the Voyager Golden Record showing who we are? Or do we attempt something more ambitious, a continuous signal, a cultural archive, a digital map of Earth? SETI researchers often argue for simplicity, prime numbers, hydrogen's spectral line, basic chemistry. The goal would not be to impress, but to prove intentionality. Yet others dream bigger, a curated message showing our achievements, art, and diversity. The risk is obvious. Any information could be used against us. To send DNA structure is to expose our biology. To send maps is to reveal our location in precise coordinates. A reply is not just communication, it is vulnerability, encoded into radio. And then comes the second question. Who decides? Do a few scientists, a UN panel, or a global referendum hold the right to speak for Earth? The debate would tear at the fabric of geopolitics, because one nation's transmission is enough to represent us all. Once the signal leaves, it cannot be recalled. If we choose silence, silence, however, is not neutrality. It is itself a choice. If Atlas lingers, watching our radio bubble, our silence may be interpreted as fear, hostility, or disinterest. And silence would not erase the fact that our planet already glows in the spectrum with artificial emissions. To stay quiet is to gamble that Atlas, or those who sent it, will not demand more. The danger of silence is misinterpretation. Just as two cultures on Earth can misread each other's customs, a civilization light years ahead of us may misread our quiet as refusal or arrogance or even deception. What we intend as caution could be read as defiance. The impossible balance. And so, humanity is caught in an impossible balance. To speak is to risk exposure. To stay silent is to risk misunderstanding. Both paths are dangerous. Neither guarantees safety. Perhaps the truest danger lies not in which option we choose, but in the fact that we may not be united when we choose it. One nation, one rogue group, or even one private company could act unilaterally, transmitting their message to Atlas. In the end, it may not be humanity as a whole that decides, but the first to seize the microphone, and that thought is as unsettling as Atlas itself. When we speak of Atlas staying, We must not think only in days or months. If it remains, humanity will have to face a horizon measured in decades, even centuries. What does it mean to live under the shadow of a silent interstellar visitor for 100 years? Scenario 1. The Century of Silence. In the most conservative outcome, Atlas does nothing. It lingers in a stable orbit or drifts slowly outward, but never leaves entirely. For scientists, this would be maddening. A constant puzzle with no solution. Impact on society. After the initial frenzy, humanity might normalize its presence, just as we did with satellites or the International Space Station. Yet beneath that normality would be an unspoken awareness. We are being watched. Risk. The silence itself could drive waves of paranoia and apathy. A century of no answers might split humanity between those who stop caring and those who see conspiracy in the void. Scenario 2. The Slow Dialogue. Perhaps Atlas would begin to respond, but on timescales beyond human patience. A signal every decade, a pattern revealed only after generations. To us, it would feel like glacial communication, but to an ancient civilization, it might be their normal pace. Impact on society. This scenario would challenge our ability to sustain long-term projects. Whole lifetimes might pass between syllables of a galactic sentence. We would have to build institutions that outlast governments, cultures, and possibly civilizations just to maintain the conversation. Risk. Impatience. Humanity might project meaning where there is none, or break protocol in desperation, sending signals without consensus. Scenario 3. Subtle intervention. If Atlas is a probe designed not just to observe but to influence, then over 100 years we may notice its fingerprints in unexpected places. Unexplained technological anomalies, interference with satellites, or data artifacts we cannot reproduce. Impact on society. The realization that Atlas is not passive but active would spark fear, but also wonder. Are we being nudged towards something? Protected? Tested? Risk. The lack of clarity could destabilize global trust. Nations might accuse each other of collaborating with Atlas, or of hiding its secrets. Scenario 4. The Long Shadow. The darkest future is one in which Atlas is not alone. If it is a vanguard, then the 100 years of its lingering presence may be a countdown. Its staying could mark Earth as known to others, with the expectation that more will follow. Impact on society. Humanity would live under a constant horizon of anticipation. Entire generations would grow up in a world defined by waiting, not for an invasion, but for something. Risk. The uncertainty itself could be corrosive, a century of civilization shaped less by what Atlas does, and more by what it refuses to reveal. In each of these scenarios, one truth dominates. Time would become alien to us. Human history is measured in decades and wars, but Atlas could operate on timescales spanning millennia. For it, staying 100 years may mean nothing. For us, it would be everything. To imagine Atlas lingering is to imagine a future in which its shadow shapes our calendar, our milestones, and our sense of history itself. Let's chart how humanity might respond across the span of a century. Year 1. Shock and scrutiny. The discovery that Atlas has altered its trajectory, refusing to leave the solar system, would dominate global news. Governments scramble for answers. NASA, ESA, and China's CNSA point telescopes toward it, while SETI institutes monitor for signals non-stop. Conspiracies bloom overnight. Ordinary people watch the skies with both awe and dread. Humanity's first year under Atlas is one of fascination tinged with fear. Year 10. The era of normalization. After a decade, Atlas is no longer headline news, but it has become part of the cultural fabric. Artists paint it. Children learn about it in school. New religions form around it, seeing it as a sign or a messenger. Scientists continue to argue, natural anomaly or artificial probe. Missions are proposed, robotic spacecraft to intercept, to sample, to test. But still, Atlas does not move, and its silence grows heavier. Year 50. The fracture point. By mid-century, the patience of nations runs thin. If Atlas has shown no activity, some governments might launch risky missions to capture fragments or land probes upon it. If such missions fail, or worse, provoke unknown responses, humanity could find itself divided. Some will accuse the explorers of endangering Earth. Others will accuse the cautious of cowardice. Meanwhile, generations have grown up never knowing a sky without Atlas. For them, it is not a visitor, but a fact of existence. Year 100. The long shadow. After a century, the presence of Atlas will have reshaped human history. If it has remained silent, Earth may drift into uneasy acceptance. The object becomes like the moon, an ever-present neighbour, but one cloaked in mystery. If it has ever spoken, even once, humanity may have dedicated entire institutions to preserving that dialogue, however slow. And if it has acted, revealing itself as probe, messenger, or something stranger, then humanity by century's end will live in a fundamentally different cosmos. Not one where we wonder if we're alone, but one where we live with the knowledge that we are not. What unites these stages is not what Atlas does, but what it forces us to become. To live under its gaze for 100 years would transform our species as much as any scientific revolution or world war. By then, Atlas would not just be a visitor, it would be part of the human story, written into our myths, our fears, and perhaps even our destiny. Humanity has faced the unknown many times before. Each encounter, whether with new worlds, strange signals, or unexpected technologies, offers us insight into how we might respond to Atlas. 1. The Age of Exploration. When Columbus reached the New World, two civilizations met with vastly unequal power. For the indigenous peoples, the encounter was catastrophic. For Europe, it was expansion and wealth. The lesson is stark. When two cultures meet and one is stronger, the weaker rarely sets the terms of engagement. If Atlas represents a more advanced intelligence, history warns us that curiosity may not protect us from consequence. 2. The Cold War and UFOs. In the 20th century, mysterious lights and objects in the sky fueled public paranoia. Governments often downplayed or concealed reports, fearing mass panic or exploitation by rivals. If Atlas stays, this precedent suggests a familiar pattern: secrecy, speculation, and distrust between nations. The lesson here is that information control becomes as dangerous as the unknown itself. 3. Sputnik and the space race. When the Soviet Union launched Sputnik in 1957, it was a simple beeping sphere, yet its meaning was enormous. Humanity was no longer confined to Earth. For the US, it was a shock, sparking the space race. If Atlas is seen as a foreign probe in our skies, it could trigger a new kind of race, not between superpowers, but between humanity and whatever sent it. History shows that technological shocks push us to adapt quickly, often chaotically. 4. The WOW signal. In 1977, a radio telescope in Ohio detected a 72-second anomaly so striking that the astronomer scribbled "WOW" in the margin. For decades, no one has been able to explain it. It remains one of SETI's great mysteries. Yet despite the excitement, the world moved on. The lesson here is unsettling. Even when confronted with possible evidence of intelligence, humans are capable of ignoring, forgetting, or dismissing it. Could Atlas suffer the same fate, reduced from existential event to cultural footnote? Through these episodes, one truth emerges: humanity's responses to the unknown swing between fear, ambition, denial, and wonder. If Atlas stays, our reaction will not be unified. It will be fractured, contradictory, and deeply human. Looking across history, a pattern emerges in how humans respond to the unfamiliar. Again and again, our trajectory seems to follow the same stages. 1. Curiosity. At first, the unknown sparks wonder. New lands, new technologies, or strange signals are greeted with fascination. People rush to study, to interpret, to dream. Atlas would be no different. Its early months of observation would trigger a tidal wave of scientific inquiry, news cycles, and cultural imagination. 2. Fear and panic. But curiosity rarely lasts without anxiety. When the implications sink in, that the unknown might carry danger, the tone shifts. During the Cold War, sightings of UFOs quickly became tied to fear of invasion. When Sputnik launched, its simple orbit was perceived as a weapon in waiting. With Atlas, the same transformation would occur. What begins as awe could harden into paranoia. Is it spying on us? Is it preparing for something? 3. control and power struggles. Inevitably, the unknown becomes a tool of politics. Leaders use it to consolidate power, justify secrecy, or rally nationalism. The space race was not only about exploration, it was about dominance. With Atlas, the temptation to control the narrative, to monopolize data, or even weaponize fear would be irresistible. Nations might fight not over what Atlas is, but over who controls the story of what it means. 4. Myth and integration. Over time, the unknown ceases to be other and becomes part of the human story. The New World became woven into Europe's destiny, Sputnik into modern technology, UFOs into pop culture. So too, Atlas would eventually become mythologized, an image stamped on coins, textbooks, novels, religions. Its origin might remain mysterious, but its cultural presence would be undeniable. The cycle applied to Atlas. If Atlas stays, we can predict the sequence. First decade, fascination and research. Second decade, rising paranoia, divisions between governments. Third decade, power struggles, secrecy, and propaganda. Beyond, Atlas becomes a fixture in human imagination, whether as threat, god, or neighbor. This cycle is both reassuring and alarming. It shows that humanity will adapt, but it also warns us that our greatest danger may not come from Atlas itself, but from ourselves, repeating old mistakes under new cosmic circumstances. If Atlas decides to stay, its presence could become the greatest catalyst, or the greatest obstacle, in humanity's technological journey. The history of science shows that nothing spurs innovation faster than competition or mystery. Atlas offers both. 1. The acceleration effect. Just as Sputnik triggered the space race, Atlas could ignite a new era of research and engineering. Nations and corporations would pour resources into astronomy, propulsion, artificial intelligence, and communications, hoping either to understand Atlas or to prepare for whatever it represents. New telescopes and arrays, humanity might build next-generation observatories far more powerful than the James Webb, optimized to monitor Atlas continuously. Deep space propulsion, efforts to intercept Atlas could push forward nuclear propulsion, solar sails, or even experimental fusion drives. AI and signal analysis, the flood of data from Atlas, spectral readings, radio monitoring, orbital models, would demand AI systems capable of detecting patterns beyond human capacity. In this scenario, Atlas becomes a cosmic deadline, accelerating progress by decades. 2. The paralysis effect. But the opposite is also possible. The sheer ambiguity of Atlas, its silence, its unknowable purpose, might freeze progress instead of advancing it. Fear of provocation. Some governments might ban deep space transmissions, fearing they would anger Atlas or its creators. Diverted resources. Instead of investing in broad human progress, resources might be funneled into defensive or secretive programs, hidden from the public. Psychological stagnation. If people come to believe that an advanced intelligence is already here, they may lose faith in human progress altogether. Why bother if we are ants watched by gods? This paralysis effect could lead to decades of stagnation, as humanity waits passively for Atlas to act instead of acting for itself. 3. The balance of terror. Perhaps the most realistic outcome is a mixture. Atlas drives rapid innovation, but in an atmosphere of fear. Just as nuclear weapons advanced physics but also cast a shadow over the 20th century, Atlas might spark breakthroughs while also creating a cosmic Cold War mindset. Every advance in propulsion or signal technology might be viewed not as exploration but as preparation for an encounter. Atlas's presence, then, is not neutral. It is catalytic, forcing humanity into motion one way or another. Whether that motion is forward into discovery or downward into fear and stagnation will depend not on Atlas, but on us. If Atlas remains in our solar system for the long haul, its effect on humanity's technological development will unfold not just in abstract theories, but in eras of progress or stagnation. Let's imagine the next century through the lens of Atlas's influence. Years 110, the spark of innovation. The first decade would be a frenzy of investment. Space agencies and private companies would scramble to develop faster rockets, better telescopes, and AI-driven analysis systems to probe Atlas's secrets. We might see the first serious pushes toward nuclear propulsion, quantum communication, or megastructures in orbit. Parallel to Sputnik, just as a beeping satellite once ignited the space race, Atlas would ignite a cosmic race, this time not against another nation but against the unknown. Risk. In the rush to innovate, safety and ethics could be neglected. Accidents, secrecy, and espionage might mirror Cold War rivalries. Years. 1050. The era of disruption. As decades pass, the initial excitement could harden into division. Some nations might treat Atlas as a threat, pouring resources into military applications. Others might see it as an opportunity, building space industries and pursuing peaceful exploration. The result, a fractured technological landscape. Boom. Breakthroughs in energy, propulsion, and data science, perhaps even the first human missions beyond Mars. Bust. At the same time, mistrust and paranoia could stall cooperation. Technologies may be hoarded rather than shared, slowing humanity's collective progress. Risk. A cosmic Cold War, with innovation driven by fear more than curiosity. Years. 5100. Divergent futures. By the end of a century, Atlas could push humanity to two very different outcomes. The golden future. If collaboration wins out, Atlas becomes the spark for a new scientific renaissance. Humanity might achieve near-light propulsion, planetary colonization, and a civilization that can sustain dialogue with another intelligence. In this world, Atlas is remembered as the silent teacher, the catalyst for humanity's leap to the stars. The dark future. If fear dominates, progress could collapse into secrecy, authoritarian control, or self-destruction. Atlas might remain untouched, but humanity, paralyzed by paranoia and divided by distrust, could stagnate or even regress. In this world, Atlas is remembered not as an opportunity, but as the ghost that haunted our decline. The lesson. Atlas itself may not intervene, but its influence would shape us regardless. Whether it becomes the spark of our ascension or the shadow of our downfall will depend less on Atlas, and more on whether humanity can rise above its oldest enemy, itself. Atlas may be silent, it may be natural, artificial, or something we cannot yet imagine. But regardless of what it is, its presence forces us to confront something deeper, what it means. For in truth, Atlas may be less about them and more about us. 1. Our fear of the unknown. Atlas reflects the core of humanity's oldest anxiety, that we are not in control. For thousands of years we have looked at the night sky and filled the darkness with gods, demons, and stories. Atlas is the modern version of that ancient unknown. It reminds us that the universe does not revolve around us, and that there may be players on the stage older, wiser, or more powerful than we dare imagine. 2. Our urge to explore. But Atlas also highlights our strength, curiosity. Even as fear rises, humanity cannot resist asking questions. What is it? Where did it come from? Why is it here? This relentless drive to know is what built civilizations, launched ships across oceans, and sent telescopes into orbit. Atlas is not just a challenge. It is an invitation to continue being what we have always been, explorers. 3. Our divisions and our unity. Atlas lays bare our fractures. Some see it as danger, others as hope. Nations quarrel over how to respond. Religions debate its meaning. And individuals project their fears onto its silence. Yet at the same time, Atlas is one of the few things that places all of humanity under a single shadow. Whether you live in New York or Nairobi, Beijing or Buenos Aires, the sky above is the same, and Atlas is there. For the first time, the entire planet shares the same question. 4. Our place in the universe. Most of all, Atlas forces us to reconsider our place. For centuries we assumed we were alone. If Atlas is proof otherwise, then Earth is no longer the sole stage of intelligence. It is just one among many. That realization can feel humbling, frightening, or exhilarating. But it is also liberating. It reminds us that we are part of something far larger than ourselves, a cosmos alive with possibility. Atlas, in this sense, is a mirror. It does not tell us what it is. Instead, it reflects back what we are: fearful, curious, divided, hopeful. The mystery of Atlas is, at its core, the mystery of humanity. If Atlas is a mirror, then its greatest significance is not in what it reveals about itself, but in what it forces us to reveal about ourselves. The object may be silent, but our responses are deafening. 1. The mirror of fear. If our first instinct is panic, secrecy, and division, then Atlas exposes the fragility of our civilization. It shows that even in the face of a silent object, we can unravel into suspicion and rivalry. In this reflection, Atlas teaches us that our greatest threat may not come from the stars, but from our own inability to unite under them. 2. The mirror of hope. If instead our instinct is wonder, cooperation, and imagination, then Atlas reveals humanity's better side. It shows that the unknown can inspire us to reach higher, to build together, to overcome the boundaries of nation and creed. In this reflection, Atlas teaches us that we are capable of becoming more than what we have been, capable of rising into the very cosmos we fear. 3. The test of identity. In the end, Atlas is a test not of science, but of identity. Who are we when the universe looks back? Are we children shouting into the dark forest, or are we explorers prepared to meet whatever listens? The answer is not in Atlas. The answer is in us. Closing vision. Perhaps, then, the true purpose of Atlas, whether probe, comet, or artifact, is to remind us that our future depends less on what the universe sends our way, and more on how we choose to face it. It may be centuries before we know whether Atlas is a messenger, an invader, or simply a stone flung by the chaos of interstellar tides. But long before that truth arrives, Atlas will have already changed us, by forcing humanity to see itself in the cosmic mirror, and to decide what kind of story we will tell the stars. And maybe, just maybe, that is the point.